Something massive is happening in Britain's housing market, and almost no one's talking about it. While headlines focus on inflation, elections, or celebrity gossip, a quiet transformation is unfolding beneath the surface. It's a shift that could determine whether you'll ever own a home, how much you'll pay in rent, and even how the next generation defines wealth itself. For years, we were told the property market was broken, that prices were simply too high and supply too low. But what if that wasn't the whole truth? What if the market isn't collapsing at all, but being rebuilt, piece by piece, policy by policy, into something entirely new? Because in early 2025, a string of government decisions began to reshape how Britain defines property ownership. The Financial Conduct Authority, the Treasury, and even corporate giants have quietly aligned around a shared idea: that the housing market should no longer be a place for individuals to build wealth, but a system for institutions to control it. This isn't a crash or a boom. It's a restructuring, a calculated reset of who gets to own, who gets to rent, and who profits from both. And what's happening right now will affect not just property prices, but the entire social fabric of the UK, so let's strip back the headlines and look at what's really happening. Because the shift isn't theoretical anymore, it's already begun. In March 2025, the Financial Conduct Authority issued a short, almost unnoticed update to its lending guidance. Buried under technical jargon, it didn't sound like much. But in reality, it quietly reversed one of the biggest barriers to home ownership. For years, UK lenders had used an outdated stress test model, assuming mortgage rates could jump 3% above whatever a borrower applied for. It was meant to protect consumers, but in practice, it locked millions out of the market. Now that rule has changed. The FCA's new framework uses realistic future rate scenarios, not extreme worst-case figures. It sounds like a technical tweak, but it's not. The impact? Suddenly, a vast number of potential buyers qualify for mortgages again. According to Nationwide and Halifax, approvals jumped by over 14% in just 2 months. For young professionals who'd been renting for years, this felt like hope returning. But hope in economics always comes with a cost, because whenever borrowing becomes easier, prices tend to follow. The same system that opens the door for one generation can quietly inflate it shut for the next. And as lenders celebrated their newfound flexibility, another change was brewing behind the scenes, one that would make this moment even more volatile, because what looked like financial inclusion was actually the start of a deregulation wave that could redefine housing entirely. By July 2025, the FCA went even further, unveiling an overhaul that banks had been lobbying for since the 2008 crash. The new rules made mortgage switching easier, reduced documentation requirements, and allowed smaller lenders to stretch income multiples. Some borrowers could now access up to 6 times their salary, something unheard of in a decade. On the surface, it sounded progressive. The Treasury framed it as unlocking mobility and stimulating a stagnant market. But behind the optimism lurked a familiar danger. Because every major housing bubble in modern history began with one thing: easy credit, and this time, the timing couldn't be more precarious. Fixed-rate mortgage deals signed during the ultra-low interest years of 2020-2022 are expiring en masse. Homeowners are being forced to refinance at rates double or triple what they paid before. For many, the only escape is to sell, and sell fast. This is where the new lending flexibility becomes a double-edged sword. While new buyers can borrow more, they're entering a market filled with desperate sellers and rising institutional interest. The perfect environment for consolidation. It's not just about houses anymore, it's about ownership itself. Because as the government expands credit, a very different group is preparing to use it in ways ordinary buyers can't even imagine. For months, major property sites like Rightmove and Zoopla have reported record listings. Supply's up nearly 10% year on year. At first glance, it seems like the long-awaited market correction. More homes available, lower prices ahead. But dig deeper, and the story looks far more complicated. Most of this supply isn't from new construction. It's from existing homeowners forced to sell. Mortgage expirations, job insecurity, and rate pressures have created a new kind of seller, not the opportunist, but the surrenderer. These aren't people cashing out, they're escaping. At the same time, buyer demand hasn't collapsed. It's risen slightly, but mostly from institutional investors and cash buyers, not first-time owners. This creates what economists call an illusory balance. On paper, supply and demand look stable. But in reality, the market's character is changing, from personal ownership to corporate acquisition. And while analysts argue over whether prices will rise or fall, few are asking who is actually buying all these homes, because as individuals exit, institutions enter, and they're not playing the same game. Across the UK, a quiet exodus is underway, one that's reshaping the very foundation of the rental market. Small and mid-sized landlords, the backbone of Britain's housing ecosystem, are leaving. Some call it a correction, others a cleansing. But for many tenants, it's the beginning of something far more concerning. Over the past year, nearly 17% of individual landlords have sold at least one rental property. The reasons seem obvious at first: rising mortgage costs, new tax burdens, and the government's proposed Renters Reform Bill, which permanently ends Section 21 no-fault evictions. On paper, that sounds fair. In practice, it's breaking the model that kept rents competitive. Because the truth is, small landlords often operated with empathy. They knew their tenants personally. They were flexible with payments, lenient during hard months, and often chose long-term stability over short-term profit. But when regulation tightens and margins shrink, these are the first to leave. And when they do, their properties don't just disappear, they're absorbed. The buyers aren't families or local investors. They're property funds, pension conglomerates, and real estate corporations, the kind that don't know your name, only your payment schedule. Once the property changes hands, the rent spikes, the fees multiply, and the human side of housing evaporates. The Office for National Statistics quietly noted that large-scale landlords, those owning over 50 units, have increased their share of the market by 12% since 2023. The average rent in those portfolios, 23% higher than in properties owned by individuals. This isn't just about affordability. It's about control, because when housing consolidates into fewer hands, power concentrates too. The disappearance of small landlords marks more than a financial shift. It's a cultural one. A movement from relationship-based renting to algorithmic living. And the irony? It's all happening under the banner of tenant protection, because as the government claims to empower renters, it's quietly handing ownership to entities that treat homes like assets, not shelter. When small landlords sell, someone has to buy. And in 2025, that someone increasingly wears a suit, not a hoodie. The names are familiar: Lloyds, Legal & General, BlackRock, and Granger. These aren't developers or property managers. They're financial institutions, building empires brick by brick, neighborhood by neighborhood. Lloyds now holds over 50,000 housing units across the UK, with plans to double that within 5 years. Legal & General isn't just investing in housing, they're owning the process. They've acquired construction firms, logistics networks, even brick suppliers. From raw material to rental payment, the pipeline is vertically integrated. Why? Because housing is no longer viewed as a social good. It's an asset class, one of the most stable and profitable in the world. Institutional investors call it residential yield. To them, your rent is a dividend, your lease, a bond. This shift is reshaping not only who owns homes, but how housing behaves. Markets once defined by local conditions, like regional wages or council planning, are now driven by global capital flows. When interest rates rise in the US, rents in Birmingham can move too. The result is subtle, but profound. Home ownership becomes aspirational again, not achievable. Renting becomes permanent, not transitional. And the concept of property ladder, once a national identity, begins to disappear entirely. Some policymakers defend the trend, arguing that corporations provide professionalized management. But that professionalism comes at a price: depersonalization. When you rent from a faceless entity, there's no empathy, no negotiation, only policy. So while small landlords vanish, their replacements are not people, but systems. Efficient, data-driven, and entirely detached. And just when it seems the system couldn't tilt further, the government is preparing one more change, a move that could shock the entire market into a new phase of control. For decades, British homeowners have paid a mix of outdated taxes: council tax, stamp duty, capital gains. But deep within Whitehall, conversations are happening about something far more radical: a land value tax. The idea is simple in theory: replace the old, inconsistent system with one based on the actual value of land, not property. Economists have debated it for years, claiming it could reduce speculation and promote fairness. But in 2025, it's being discussed not as an experiment, but as a solution to Britain's fiscal crisis. The Treasury, facing record debt and declining tax receipts, is searching for new revenue streams. A land value tax, and set at around 0.8% annually on properties above $500,000, could generate billions. But here's the catch. Half of London's family homes fall into that bracket. So while it's pitched as a tax on the wealthy, it actually targets the middle class. That means ordinary homeowners, not investors or corporations, would bear the weight. For those already stretched by mortgages, this could trigger a wave of forced sales. And once those homes hit the market, guess who's waiting to buy? Institutional funds with cash reserves and zero emotional attachment. In effect, the policy would accelerate the very consolidation it claims to prevent. It's a loop. Regulation pushes individuals out and corporations step in. And perhaps that's not an accident. Because as housing becomes financialized, the state's incentive shifts too. It no longer relies on stable ownership, it relies on stable revenue. A population renting from corporate landlords provides predictable income streams. A nation of owners? Too unpredictable. So while the government markets it as modernization, this land tax might be the final domino, the one that transforms housing from a public aspiration into a private portfolio. And when that happens, what's left of the idea of home ownership itself? If you zoom out, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. The UK housing market isn't malfunctioning. It's evolving, deliberately. Every policy, every financial shift, every corporate move seems disconnected. Until you line them up. First, lending rules loosen, more credit enters the system. Then, small landlords exit, shrinking local competition. Next, corporations absorb assets, increasing their control. Finally, tax reform looms, forcing even more ownership transfer. It's not chaos. It's choreography, and the most striking part? There's no conspiracy. These aren't secret backroom deals, they're public policies justified in the language of stability and fairness. But stability for whom? Fairness to what end? In practice, what's emerging is a new kind of feudalism, digital, data-driven, and entirely legal. A Britain where property no longer circulates among people, but concentrates among institutions. Ownership is being replaced with access. And access, of course, can be priced. The social consequences will be generational. Wealth inequality widens. Economic mobility slows. The line between owning and renting blurs until it vanishes completely. But to the policymakers, the system is functioning exactly as designed. Predictable, liquid, and secure. Because once housing becomes an industry, not an ecosystem, every human outcome is just a financial one. When we talk about Britain's housing crisis, we often frame it as a story of broken systems, greedy landlords, or bad luck. But maybe it's something else entirely. Maybe it's a managed evolution, a restructuring of what homeownership means in the modern age. The market isn't collapsing. It's consolidating. Ownership is not disappearing, it's being redefined. And what's unfolding in 2025 may one day be remembered not as a crisis, but as the year Britain's property market entered its corporate era. The irony is almost poetic. The very policies meant to protect renters, empower buyers, and stabilize prices may end up ensuring that only the wealthiest ever truly own. Everyone else rents, not just their home, but their future. So the question isn't whether you can afford to buy, it's whether you'll ever be allowed to. Because beneath the noise of daily headlines, a silent architecture is forming. One built not of bricks and mortar, but of contracts, code, and capital. And if we're not paying attention, we'll wake up one day to realize that housing, the foundation of our lives, has become something else entirely, a product we consume, not a right we hold. So before you scroll to the next video, ask yourself who really owns Britain now, and share this with someone who still believes the housing market is just about prices. Because what's happening today isn't about numbers, it's about power.